Hi everyone, this is Stephanie from the Pasadena Public Library. Today I have a sewing tutorial on how to sew these mini treat bags. These little gift bags are perfect for gifting baked goods or candies, and the supplies listed should make 4 bags, each 4 inches tall. I'm using Halloween fabric, but of course you could use something else if you're making these gift bags for another occasion. So you just want to select 2 coordinating fabrics that kind of work together because you'll be using both fabrics on the bags. So first I'm just going to go over the supplies that you'll need for this project. You can find a link to the pattern pieces in the description below. I've also listed the cutting dimensions in case you don't want to print out the pattern pieces, but there should be a pattern piece A, B, and C. You'll also need about 48 inches of 3/8 inch wide ribbon, which I have here, and we're using that for the handles of the bags. You'll need some pins and of course your fabric. So for this project you'll need 2 1/4 yard cuts of fabric or 2 fat quarters of fabric. I have 2 fat quarters here. So I've gone ahead and ironed my fabric so it's ready to cut out, and I'm just laying my 2 fat quarters right on top of each other, so I have 2 layers of fabric. So to save myself a little bit of time in cutting, I'm just going to take my stack of fat quarters and fold it in half one more time so that it's about 9 inches by 22 inches, and I've got 4 layers of fabric here. So I've printed out 2 of each pattern piece so that I don't have to reuse the same pattern piece as I'm cutting. If your fabric shears are not really sharp or you don't have a really sharp rotary cutter, you might want to just cut through 2 layers of fabric at a time, and then you'll just have to reuse your pattern pieces. So I'm just going to place 2 of pattern piece A, 2 of pattern piece C below those, and then 2 of pattern piece B. Make sure that you have everything on the grain line so it shouldn't be turned sideways or crooked. Now I'm just going to pin these in place and cut them out. Once you're done cutting out, you should have 8 of each pattern piece. So you should have 4 darks and 4 lighter colors of each pattern piece. Now I'm just going to start sorting them into their tote bags. So for the first tote bag, I'm going to grab 2 darker colors for the large piece. Then for the smallest piece, I'm going to get another 2 darks to match, and then for the medium-sized piece I want 2 of the contrasting lighter colored fabric, and that is 1 tote bag right there. So to make the next bag, I'm going to start with 2 large light pieces, 2 dark medium-sized pieces, and 2 small light pieces. So just keep forming the bags this way until you have 4 tote bag supplies stacked up. So now I've organized my bags by tote bag, so I have bag 1, 2, 3, and 4. Go ahead and stack up bags 2, 3, and 4 so that they are set aside, and we'll start with just our first bag. Okay, so the large piece here is going to be the lining, so I'm going to set that one aside. So the outer bag panels are formed by the medium piece on top with the smaller piece underneath it. Because my fabric does have a direction, I don't want my ghosts to be upside down, I just lined it up like this so that I can make sure that everything is going the right direction. Then I go ahead and flip my fabric down. Now that it's right sides together, I'm going to pin this in place, then repeat with the other bag panel. Now I'm going to take this to the sewing machine and stitch it together at 3/8 of an inch along this one long edge. The seam allowance for this whole pattern is 3/8 of an inch, so I'm just lining up the right edge of my fabric with the 3/8 mark on my sewing machine, which is right here. It's the first mark to the right of my presser foot. I'm going to backstitch, stitch all the way along this long edge, and backstitch at the end. Then repeat with the other bag panel. It's always a good idea to press your seams as you go, so I'm just going to press this seam allowance towards the bottom of the bag on both of these panels. Now I'm ready to attach the handles. So for each side of the bag, I am going to need a 6-inch piece of ribbon. So take your ruler and cut 2 equal length bits of ribbon about 6 inches long. Now I'm going to pin the ribbon in place along the top of the bag here. So I'm going to measure over 2 inches from one side and then 2 inches from the other side and pin the ribbon in place, being careful not to twist it. Now I'm going to do the same thing with the other side of the bag. Now I want to baste my straps in place, so I'm going to stitch right along the top of the bag here where the handles are, and I'm going to do it slightly less than 3/8 of an inch, so you can do about 1/4 of an inch, or you can just line up the edge of your fabric with the edge of your presser foot so that you know you are stitching within your seam allowance, so that this stitching won't show up later. For the next step, we're going to be stitching the lining to each panel separately, and we're going to stitch it right along this top edge of the bag. So in order to make sure my ghosts are not upside down, I want them going in the same direction as the ghosts on the front of the bag here. So make sure if your fabric has a direction that you keep that in mind. So I am lining up the top edge of my lining with the top edge of my exterior bag panel. These pieces should be right sides together. Now I'm going to pin this in place and sew it at 3/8 of an inch along this top edge. Then do the same with the other panel and other lining. Now I'm just going to press the seam allowance to one side. I'm going to do that with both of the panels that I just sewed together. Now our 2 panels are ready to be stitched together, so I am going to place them right sides together just like this, so that the linings are together and the exterior panels are together. At the bottom of your lining, make a mark that is at least 3 fingers wide, right at the bottom with some chalk. That will remind you not to stitch over that area. Now I'm going to pin all the way around this rectangle. As I'm pinning, I'm just making sure that the seams that I've sewn are lining up with each other along the edges. to stitch starting from one chalk mark all the way around the bag, and I'm going to stop when I get to that other chalk mark so that I'm leaving an area about 2 or 3 inches unstitched at the bottom of the lining. As you stitch over some of these seam allowances, there may be times where you need to lift up your presser foot, so make sure your needle is down, then lift up that presser foot and place that seam allowance underneath the presser foot so you can keep sewing. Otherwise, the seam allowance can sometimes get kind of bunched up. Now we need to press all of our seam allowances open along the sides. So the way I like to do that is take one side of one seam allowance and press it towards the bag, then flip the bag over and press the seam allowance from the other side towards the bag, and then just repeat that with all 4 edges of your bag. So now that my seam allowances are all pressed open, I am ready to box out all 4 corners of the bag. So to do this, you kind of want to just pull on the front and back panels so that you can line up the bottom edge and the side edge here, and they should be running right down the middle here. Now I'm just going to pin this in place, and I'm going to use a ruler and a pencil to mark over an area that is 1 inch away from the peak. I'm just marking that with pencil so that you guys can see it, and then I'm going to mark a line that is about 2 inches long, and it should go right through that pencil mark that I just drew, and that is going to be my stitching line for the corners. Now you just want to repeat those steps with your other 3 corners so that all 4 corners of your bag are pinned and marked. Now I'm going to stitch over each of these 4 corners using my pencil mark as the stitching line. Remember, as always, to backstitch at the beginning and end of these seams. So unfortunately I don't have footage of this next step, but it is really simple. All you need to do is trim off the extra seam allowance on each of these corners. So just trim about 1/4 of an inch to 3/8 of an inch away from the line that we just stitched on each of these corners. You'll just cut off that extra bulk triangle that's hanging off of each corner. Then once you do that, place a couple of fingers inside the hole in your lining and pull the bag right side out. So the last bit of stitching we need to do is just to close up the hole in the bottom of the lining. So I have just pinned this hole closed. You could also do a slip stitch and hand stitch this hole closed, but I think for something like this where I want to make a bunch of them, I am just gonna really quickly edge stitch it closed by machine. So I'm just stitching really close to the edge, about a 1/16 of an inch away, making sure to catch both sides of the lining. And I am just gonna stitch all the way across, back stitching at the beginning and end. Now just go ahead and pop that lining inside the bag, and we'll take this over to the ironing board for a final press. So I just want to press this top edge of the bag so it's nice and crisp. If your ironing board is small enough, you can kind of just put the bag off the edge of it like this. If your ironing board is a little bit too big to do it that way, just place the bag on top and you can iron from the inside of your bag just like this. So now I am going to continue with my next bag. It's going to be basically the reverse of the bag that I just made, and then I'll go ahead and make my last, third, and fourth bag. So there they are, all 4 bags completed using just those 2 fat quarters. I think that this makes a really good gift. I can't wait to fill these up with treats and give them away. I think that they would work really well for other occasions as well, not just Halloween. I also just really love the use of the 2 contrasting fabrics. I think it works really well and you get 2 different looking bags out of it as well. If you do end up making any of the projects that we teach here, I hope that you'll share it with us on Instagram at Pasadena Library. If you'd like to find out about any of our upcoming programs, you can find a link to our events calendar in the description below. Thanks for watching!